small business town hall series. We've been doing this, I think, for 20 weeks now. We've had some great topics, and today we've got an even better one with Jason Knight. He's going to be going in and diving into business operating systems and the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS. Before we pass it over to him, I'd like to share a little bit of information about Exit Advisors. Many of you have probably seen this before, but excuse me, we are a Houston-based M&A advisory firm that works with entrepreneurs, seasoned business owners to help them around their M&A transactions and ultimately increase the value of their business. That Jason's topic today is one of the key components to that. We also take a kind of different approach than most investment banks or consulting groups in that we really like to work with you months in advance before, or even years in advance before your transaction occurs, to help you, like I said, increase the value of your business, streamline your operations, do some financial and accounting cleanup, that sort of thing. We also try to partner with a lot of our other service providers like CPAs, search funds, private equity groups, wealth managers in order to share our services with their clients so that they are prepared when they want to prepare for an exit. We also take a really education-based approach, and that's one of the special things about our team. Real quick introduction to everyone. We've got Al Danto, one of the managing partners. Al was a serial entrepreneur for 30 years. He'd been doing similar work with Casey Bright, actually, prior to forming Exit Advisors. And then he and Gary teamed up. Gary shares the same passion for education. He's built several successful accounting practices over the years and has pretty much dabbled in almost every relevant industry over the course of his career. Then you've got myself. Work very closely with Casey on the actual process with our clients. And then John Maneri, who was in a lot of your shoes. He was a very successful entrepreneur, built a business from scratch, had a very, very lucrative and successful exit, and believed in our process so much that he joined our team. So most importantly, let's get over to Jason. I'm actually going to pass it over to Gary, who's going to introduce Jason in a little more detail. But what he's talking about today is going to be one of the cornerstones to building up this type of successful business so that you can exit. So Gary, why don't you take over?
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Jason Knight, but I'm going to do it in brief. I'm going to let Jason go into a little bit more detail. But Jason is my company's EOS implementer. And so what does that mean? That means that we are a lot better organized. We have a solid infrastructure. We have the right people in the right seats. We are able to communicate our core values, not just to our employees, but to our clients and to our prospects. And Jason has really shed a lot of light as far as company-specific risk and how the entrepreneur owner needs to push out that responsibility and put those right people in the right seats and really build a foundation to start growing a large and successful business. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason and let him tell you a little bit more about his history and the things that he's accomplished.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate that. That's a great start. Gary touched on a lot of the things that are really important to all of my clients and part of what EOS has to offer. So today's topic is, what the heck is a business operating system? So you've heard a lot about EOS, but you may not recognize that it is a business operating system. There's others out there. This is one that's heavily used, and I believe in heavily myself, having used it in my previous companies. So just to give you a quick background on me, so I am a professional EOS implementer based here in Houston, but my clients are all over the country and really all over the world. We provide this service virtually to most of my clients, and it works really well, but I'll get into some of those details in a minute. So my background is as an entrepreneur myself. I've started and grown and sold a number of companies over the years. I've been a part of technology companies, aviation businesses, construction companies. Most had a technology spin on them. But as we grew these companies, we did it both organically as well as through acquisitions. And what I found is over time with acquisitions, we were on a kind of a rapid growth plan, we really needed some structure to organize what we did so that as we brought the different groups together, we needed consistency in our vision and our execution model, and frankly, the health of the team. As you can imagine, pulling together, rolling up a lot of entrepreneurs together is a bit like herding cats. It can be challenging. And so we went on a journey to discover the right system to manage this growth process. And we came across EOS, and we used an implementer, a guy named Mark Winters out of Dallas, who is the author of Rocket Fuel. And that's primarily what he does now. He continues to write and publish books and tools to assist through the EOS process. But we had great success in doing that, and found that it brought the necessary structure and organization that we needed to be able to scale the way we did. So sold the company in 2014 into a roll-up, and we were the largest of the roll-up companies, and so we were tasked with running that, and so grew that. We were around 50 million at the time, grew to 98 million or so, and then I retired out of that, and then continue to do this full time now. So basically taking the same methodology and bringing it to other companies, and some of the lessons I learned, and use of the system to help other companies grow. So that's what I do full time now. So let's get into it. So getting real to start with. Most of my clients, most organizations have a lot of common themes throughout the organization. If you look at their past and why they start looking for a business operating system to begin with, we were no different. We had loads of frustrations, whether we recognized them or not. There was a sense of lack of control. I used to tell my wife that when I'd get home, I felt like I was pushing a boulder up the mountain, and if I ever took a pause, it would just roll me over. And so this sense of anxiety and stress, and things were out of control, and I knew that there was things that were going to drop on the floor, but I just didn't know where they were. And so the sense that there's more going on than you can get your arms around, and that is a great indicator that we need to get some control. The second is profit, right? So whether in the lack thereof specifically, right? So organizations that are maybe not growing as fast as you want, that the time, energy, the resources, money invested in it is not making the return that you were expecting to come from that. The third is people, and people are challenging, and that's true in the outside world, but certainly even more so in your company. And just that realization that no one seems to care as much as I care, and no one seems to be as committed and engaged as I need them to be. And so if you look at the stats out there on employee engagement, it's pretty, it's a sad figure. And so it's a common challenge, managing people and getting the right people in place. The sense that you're hitting the ceiling, what you were doing before isn't necessarily working anymore. You've hit a point where it was, growth came pretty quickly, but the market changed, your competition changed, the culture changed, COVID happened, things happen that will stunt that growth, and it requires you to adapt and do something different in order to sustain growth. And then lastly, that nothing seems to work, right? So that the sense that, hey, I've read all the books, I've bought all the tools, I've gone to the workshops and the webinars, I've invested in technology, but I'm getting to where it's kind of the flavor of the month now, and losing credibility with my team, and nothing is really seeming to work. And so what we're going to talk about is how to accomplish all these, how to tackle those. And part of that is through the use of a business operating system. It sounds cliche. It's not overly complicated. In fact, nothing I'm going to talk about today is going to be earth-shattering. In other words, you've probably heard these things before. Many of those books that we just talked about, right? The systems and the tools, are out there. A lot of what we're going to talk about has been around for 100 years. But what's missing from those books like Good to Great and all the great ones that are out there, it tells you, it gives you wisdom on what to do, but it doesn't really tell you how to do it. So a lot of what a business operating system does, and specifically EOS, is it simplifies all of these best practices that have been around forever. It gives you a prescriptive approach to actually how to do it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So keeping it simple, that's the key to EOS. It is simple, sometimes overly so, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. There's many things in life that's true of. They'll quote from Thomas Jefferson or Ben Franklin. I'm forgetting now. This letter would have been short. I think it's Ben Franklin. The letter would have been shorter, but I ran out of time. Right? It's the idea that sometimes you got to work really hard to make something simple, and that's the principle behind everything we're going to do. So the model starts with you at the center, your business, and it focuses on 6 key areas of management. So what we've discovered over time is that all issues ultimately fall into one of these 6 key areas. And so the journey with EOS is strengthening each of those 6 key areas and getting you from where you're at to ideally 100%. The reality is no one's perfect. You'll never get to 100% in all areas, but we do set a bar. We want to get you to 80%. And we have ways of quantifying and measuring your strengths in each of these areas. The reality is that most companies succeed in spite of themselves. Most are really more like in the 20% range. So our goal is going to get you from this ad hoc management of all these areas at 20% effectiveness and get you up to where you're 80% or greater strong across the board. And that's where you see the most successful companies, the companies that are growing, and those competitors that are killing the market that may be in your space. Chances are that they're strong in most, if not all, of these areas. So we talk about vision to start with, and I love this quote from Thomas Edison: vision without execution is hallucination, meaning that you can have a big dream and a great idea, but if you don't have the execution behind it to accomplish it, then it's not going to go anywhere. And really everything we talk about within EOS is setting that vision, the clarity of the vision, but then putting the execution behind it to actually accomplish it. So what does that look like? So within vision, we spend time going through 8 key questions. And again, this becomes basically a simplified business plan. So not a 50-page business plan with color graphs and all kinds of great components and elements to the business plan that gets put on a shelf and never looked at. This is really a simplified form to capture 8 key areas within the business plan that need to be identified so that we know what we're doing. So we go through, identify essentially who we are, what we are, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. So we start with core values. Core values is the who we are. And now core values, it's kind of a cliched term now. It's overused and frankly abused. Most companies, you probably have core values defined. You may put them on your email signature. You might write them on the wall in cursive. You might have them on your website. But if you look at most core values that are out there, they are aspirational at best, and sometimes they don't really mean much to the organization. You have a sense that we need them, and perhaps you've been through a process where you've developed them because that was what needed to be done, but you don't really do anything with them. So in this case, we work hard on identifying the core values that genuinely reflect the soul of your company. Sometimes they're written in a way that you wouldn't want to share them with your clients or put it on the website. We want to make sure they're really straightforward and they genuinely represent who you are in a way that your team can understand. So sometimes they're very straightforward, and they're not wordsmiths to be eloquently stated, but they're very clear. Now, we also stay away from things like integrity and honesty. Hopefully, all of you obviously are honest organizations. That's kind of a given. But when you say things like integrity, can you really, can you measure that? And unless you can actually show how you've got greater integrity than any other organization out there, it's something that is kind of a given. Also, by the way, it gets kind of abused. Enron and WorldCom and the Houston Astros had integrity as their core values. And obviously, that didn't seem to mean much to them, right? So we want to stay away from those. We want to clarify what really represents the soul of the company. But we do this for a couple of reasons, not just because we want to go through the exercise of defining the core values. It's not a sales tool. It's a way to identify what you're about internally, the who are we, and we'll talk in a minute how they get applied more effectively. The next is what are we? What's our purpose, cause, and passion? Very specifically, what do we do? And so I spend time not just going through this exercise, but I go through what I call the core competency matrix, but identifying areas that you're strongest, so that when we hit the ball, we're hitting it on the sweet spot every time. We're not chasing shiny objects and chasing areas of business that are outside of what we should be doing. We were focused on the things that we can do the best. We then identify that, so that was the who we are, the core values, what we are, the core focus. Then we look at the where are we going? You know, and this is an area that people get in trouble. We oftentimes have a general idea where we want to go as an organization, but I equate it to a road trip. It's not enough to say we're going west, right? Because west could be Seattle or it could be San Diego. They're very different wests and require a different route and potentially a different set of resources to get there. So we want to get very specific in identifying where you're going. So what do you want from the business? What's the number one thing that you're trying to accomplish within the business? We identify it 5 to 30 years out. A lot of my clients are picking 2030 as their goal and identifying very specifically what that is. The benefit to having a specific destination is, number one, you know where you're going and the whole organization can get clear on that. And you understand what it's going to take to get there. So in that analogy of San Diego, we know that halfway through the journey, we should be in El Paso on I-10. Right? Further still, we can back up and say, okay, we should be at Buc-ee's at this stage on I-10 of the journey. And ideally, we go all the way down to where we say, well, in order to get to San Diego, the first step is take a left out of the driveway. Right? So we want to make sure we take that big vision and we're going to work on boiling it down into very specific, tangible actions that we can take. So the next is the marketing strategy. So we've said who we are, what we are, where we're going, and the next components are really the how are we going to get there. Right? So the marketing strategy, this isn't a really complex, comprehensive marketing strategy. Your marketing people are not going to be overwhelmed by this task. But what it does do is it brings clarity to the leadership team and everybody in the organization on simple things like who is our target market? Who do we best sell to? It seems obvious, but often it's not. When you really identify very clearly your geographic, the demographic, the psychographic elements, the profiles of the ideal client, so that you hire a new salesperson, you can say, okay, this is the list. Go get these. Because they love the business that we do. We deliver a great product to them. They like working with us. We're profitable doing it. And we enjoy doing it, right? So find those. And what you find is that there are elements, when you really start getting into this, there are areas of your business that perhaps you're not making money on or you're not serving them well. And it's distracting from that core target. And so we want to make sure and clearly define that so you know how to go forward in your business. We work on things like your 3 uniques and your proven process. So you're doing things the best and the right way every time. What does it look like from our first contact all the way through a lifelong client? What's that process look like? Do you know what the next steps are? And your clients, are they clear on what the next steps are? And your whole staff knows how each of the pieces fits together. So we work on that. We work on things like a guarantee. How do we minimize the perceived risk of doing business with us and tear down the barriers? So then we work on next our 3-year picture. So if San Diego was the long-term target or the 10-year target, 3-year picture would be kind of like that El Paso point, right? So in 3 years from now, what does it look like? So we get very much more specific now. So whereas the 10-year was a goal out on the horizon, this is a near-term objective that we want to accomplish. So 3 years from now, what is the specific date that we're going to target? What's our specific revenue number that we want to achieve? What's our profit look like? And what measurable is going to get us there? If you sell widgets, how many widgets do we have to be selling per year at some predicted margin rate in order to accomplish these numbers? And then what does it look like? So at that point, at that level of revenue, you might say, well, we need more facilities, we need better systems, we're going to have more salespeople, perhaps we're in two other territories, maybe another product line has to be on board, but what does that look like? So now we're starting to get more clarity on what things we need to start working on in order to set us up for that 10-year to be true. Next, we work on our 1-year plan, a lot closer in now at this point. We develop a future date, our revenue targets, profit, and our measurables. And then very specifically, what are the goals for the year? So this is a lot closer, obviously 12 months from now, what has to happen for this predicted future to become true? So this may be addressing certain issues. It could be shoring up your organizational structure. There's lots of things that have to happen to lay the foundation before you start adding floors onto this building. So once we have these goals, now we really know what we have to work on, right? We're getting close to the take a left out of the driveway types of action items in order to get to our destination. And then rocks. Rocks are big objectives we'll talk about in a bit, but specifically what are our 90-day objectives that have to get done? Similar to our 1 year, it's going to be what's the future date, revenue, profit, measurables, and what are the big objectives that have to happen this quarter in order to set us up for the 1 year to be true, which has to be true for the 3 year to be true, which has to be true for the 10 year to be true. So just breaking all that down so that we have clarity on our actions. And then lastly, issues are going to come out of all of this. We want to make sure we're capturing our issues. And I'll say this again later, but my most successful clients are the ones with the longest issues list. I know it's counterintuitive, but what that means is they've got a culture of getting issues out and on the table, so they're spoken. They're not hidden or suppressed. That the team feels comfortable bringing issues out, getting them on the table. We have a culture of setting up issues and getting them solved. We're going to talk about how we do that. So that's the 8 questions. If you put all that together, you've got a business plan that sets you up for the next 90 days, 1 year, 3 years, 10 years, and how to accomplish that. Now, let me pause for a second and say the work I do with exit advisors works really well in that we lay this foundation for the organization. We're setting a big vision of where it's going. You as an entrepreneur, you might have an exit plan in 5 years. And that's where exit advisors is key, right? So we're creating a structure so that you are set up for success. You've got a vision. And frankly, in a few years, when we start looking at potential buyers of your organization, we're going to be selling the vision of where it's going. And we can show you're on the trajectory to accomplish that vision. So the organization's vision and direction doesn't have to be in a direct alignment with your own personal as an entrepreneur. In fact, this system gives you the freedom to be able to start making those choices, because the goal is going to be to build up a leadership team. We'll talk about that, and getting the organization where it's structured and running and not overly dependent on you, which makes it sellable, of course. Not all of my clients, by the way, want to sell, but those that do, that's a key element to the strategy. So we get the vision identified. Again, who are we, what are we, where are we going, and how are we going to get there? And we make sure that everybody in the organization from top to bottom understands that vision. It's shared by all. They've bought into it. And by the way, we do this as a leadership team, so there's greater level of acceptance of the vision. They've bought into it because they were part of the creation of that vision. So shared by all. So in order to accomplish a great vision, though, you've got to have great people. It's an obvious, but this can be one of the most challenging areas of business. I know I found this to be true. And before I had a methodical way of doing this, a lot of our people hiring, we look at qualifications. We go through an interview, see how we feel about them, and then we give them a shot. And if it just didn't work out, we didn't always know why it just didn't work out. We let them go, or they'd leave, and a little bit of chaos would happen as a result of that. And we try it again. So a little trial and error until you get a great team on board. But that is not very effective, and frankly, it's very expensive. So one thing we're going to work on together is how to identify what it means to have great people specifically in your organization. Because frankly, what is a great person in my organization may not be a great person in yours. They may not be in alignment. So we talk about right people, right seat. That's a concept that you've probably read many times before in lots of other books. But how do you quantify that and measure that? So we use a tool called the People Analyzer. And the People Analyzer, those core values that we talked about earlier, the soul of the company, what are we really about? This is why it's important that you not have just lofty goals, but you actually are lofty core values, but they actually mean something to your organization. And you can explain what each one of these means. We simply go through a process of evaluating people against that. So we have an exercise we go through where we gauge them plus, minus, minus, or think of it as high, medium, low. Do you consistently represent that core value? Do you most of the time, sometimes do it, represent the core value, or do you rarely represent that core value? What you'll find over time, just like in this example with Martin, there may be something you just can't put your finger on why it's such a challenge to manage Martin, or why he doesn't feel like he's a great fit. But now you start getting a chance to identify and quantify where those gaps are. And this helps you to weed out the people that shouldn't be on your team, and it helps to attract those that should. So repelling the ones that shouldn't and attracting those that should be on your team. Not everybody's a great fit for your culture, frankly. I'll give you an example. I've got a few clients that have very countering cultures. So one is a professional services term in the Northeast, a professional services company, a team in the Northeast that is hard driving. That's part of their core values. You're always on. If you get a phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning or an email, there's an expectation that you're gonna be on it. You know, and I've got other clients that have high work-life balance values. So if you send an email at 1 o'clock in the morning, you'll get chastised for not valuing the work-life balance. Well, neither one's wrong, but they're just different cultures. So imagine someone coming from the high driving culture and going to work for the work-life balance culture, and the conflicts and the challenges that would come from that, or vice versa. So again, it's not about right or wrong, but identifying who you are. What is the soul of your company? Let's make sure the people we bring into it match that. So we understand what our right people are. The next is right seat. And so the right seat exercise that we go through, there's a couple of tools we use to identify what that is. So we take a structure first, people second approach. That sounds cold, but it's not. The idea here is when we go through this exercise is, what should the structure be? If you were trying to build something and you built it based on only on the inventory you had on hand, well, you're not necessarily going to build to the perfect specs. You're going to build with lots of caveats, and it may not be what you need. Whereas if you started with a design, decide what the specs should be, and let's add the components we happen to have in inventory, but perhaps there's some that we don't. So maybe there's some gaps that we need to fill, but then you ultimately will end up with a structure you should have versus the structure that you're willing to accept because this is what we have on hand. Most organizations grow and the structure grows, just kind of morphs over time based on the teams that you have in place. So we're not looking to disrupt your team drastically, but what we do want to do is understand what is the ideal structure and just build a team from that. So we do that partly through using an accountability chart. And so this is partly the realization that every organization has three main functions. They've got a sales and marketing function, they've got an operations function, they have a finance function. It doesn't matter if you're Apple Computer, you're Exxon Mobil, or if you're Bob's Garage, you have these three functions. Now, you may not have people in all of them, or there may be lots of other components. Operations may be blown up to lots of other seats or more complex seats, but frankly, they all kind of fall into these buckets. So we start with a structure, find out what is the right structure for your organization, and we approach this as an accountability chart. This is not an org chart. It's really about business functions. What roles, functions and roles exist within the company, and then who owns those. We find that org charts in an entrepreneurial company tend to get in the way. Titles create egos. but they don't bring clarity. So it's really a double whammy. And what we're after is absolute clarity. So when we identify a certain seat, we understand what functions and roles exist. We put a name on it, and we start building the base of accountability. We actually have a session in a few weeks to talk more about driving accountability in the organization. But it's important that you have the right structure in place and you understand with clarity what our expectations are of each role. So we have that. And the next is we have an integrator within EOS. That's what we call it, but it's the person that's driving the vision through the organization, holding everyone accountable, and they are driving the execution throughout the organization. And you'll see above that dotted line, about 50% of the time we'll have a visionary. Well, visionary they're big idea people. If you're an entrepreneur and you started your company, there's a good chance that you're a visionary. Well, visionaries are great big idea people. They're not always great at execution and operational responsibility. I speak from experience. I was our visionary in my company, and I've got loads of ideas of things I wanted to do. Probably out of every 20 ideas, 19 would take us into the ditch, but one would have taken us to the next level. And it was really necessary to have an integrator there to help take some of those ideas, filter out what we couldn't do, and help us drive and execute on what we can do. So if you're a visionary and you're sitting in that integrator seat, chances are that you're frustrated, you're probably bored, your people are frustrated, and your company goes through these cycles of different directions. It creates a little bit of chaos. I'm not saying it can't be done, it's just rare. So if you're a visionary that's excellent at executing as an integrator, you're an exceptionally rare individual. But what we want to do is create a structure that frees you to be what you are. So if you are a visionary, we want to free you to do that and put an integrator in place. So the seats are simply a process of defining what the seat is and defining what do they own in that very specifically. And each of these gets a definition under it. So the person taking that seat is very clear on what they should do. And sometimes it's surprising that for the first time ever, I hear from people that I've got clarity on what I'm supposed to be doing. This isn't necessarily a job description. This is the functions within the business that you're accountable for. Now, it doesn't mean you're the one doing all these things, but you're accountable for it. If we're off track, for instance, hitting the sales numbers, we know who we're going to hold accountable. It's not a collective team accountability. It's an individual. So you'll never have more than one name on a box, but you certainly might have one name on multiple boxes, especially in smaller companies. So the key is understanding what we expect of the role. We know what we need from you. You know what we're expecting you to do. And then we go through the process of just identifying, do they get it? Do they want it? And have the capacity for it. So the right seat is, number one, clearly defined. And the second is this the right person for that? So we talk about, do you get it? So that's we always say the God-given ability, the innate talent to do this thing. Does your brain work the way we need it to work in that role? So an example I can give, one of my companies is a virtual reality gaming studio. We develop all kinds of crazy, fun virtual reality games. And part of that is developing these elaborate virtual reality environments. And so the artists that develop those are amazingly talented. They do things I could never dream of doing. And their brains work in a way that we need them to in order to be able to creatively develop what we need developed. But if I'm hiring an environment artist, and you come to me and your background is you're an MBA and you're an accountant by trade and you just love spreadsheets and you're super structured, it would be a red flag. Right off the bat, I would say, I'm not so sure you get it, right? Because that's a left and right brain thing. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but it at least throws a flag that says, I'm not so sure there's a perfect fit there. The next is, do you want it? And this is something you can't make people want it. You can't pay them too much. You can't manipulate them into doing it. If you've done that, it won't be sustained. They need to want it. They need to wake up every day and say, this is this is what I want to do. And if you got that, that's a winning element. And lastly, it's capacity, right? So do you have the learned ability, the gained ability to do the role that we need you to do? So I'll give you another example. One of my clients is an aerospace company, and they had a position for a welder. They happen to be in Kansas, in an area that's there's not a lot of talent around there. And with this open position of a welder, specifically a precision welder, and you can imagine in aerospace, it's really important. They had a kid that came, applied for a position, and his background is growing up on a farm boy, and he's probably welded since he was 3. Right? The kid knows everything there is to know about welding in that environment. So you say, okay, does he get it? Absolutely. He was born and is made for this. Does he want it? Desperately. He's probably willing to do it for free. Right? This is what he wants more than anything else. Does he have the capacity to do it? He doesn't. He's not done TIG welding and high precision welding. So this is the case where the company said, okay, well, he gets it and he wants it, but we've got a plan for him to gain the capacity. So they were willing to take the risk there, but it was quantifiable. They knew what it was. So 6 months from now, you need to be up to speed. You need to have the capacity to do it. And we're going to pair you up shoulder to shoulder with someone who'll be a mentor to help you get there. And over time, and actually what happened is he's a rock star because he definitely fit their core values. He snaps into the soul of the company. He gets it. He really wants it. And now he's got the capacity, and not just the capacity, but the capacity in the way that they need him to. And he's just been a rock star. So you want to know how to get rock stars in your company, make sure they fit those 2 elements. So back on the people analyzer, we go through that same process, but in this case, we want it to be all yeses. If there's a no in there, with exception of capacity, you might have an asterisk on there. If you've got a specific plan, they shouldn't be on board. So get everybody in the organization with the right seats. So what you're going to find, there are 2 types of people issues that will come from this. Right person, wrong seat. They fit the soul of the company, but they're in the wrong seat. But the good news is if you're a big enough company, you can find a seat that they might fit in. The next is wrong person, right seat, and these are more challenging. Right? So this oftentimes is a salesperson that's killing it, but they are toxic. They're creating all kinds of friction. They don't fit your culture. And this is a case where more often than not, making a change, as painful as that is, to get them out so that you get the right person in the right seat, and that will solve so many issues. But we tackle those. So that's the people component. The next is data. And data is really about running your company on the objective facts and figures, the specific components that run your company. I love this quote. If we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. Well, we don't want you running on opinions. We want you to run on objective facts and figures. A lot of you have dashboards and huge KPIs. And don't mistake the 2 here. A scorecard is a simplified, boiled down, small set of numbers that run your company. We understand the correlation of the numbers. We understand the story behind the numbers. When it moves, we understand why it did. We can take action on that. So it doesn't mean that there's not other things you can measure, but a scorecard is something we simplify for the leadership team. And so we just simply identify the measurables, understand the goals, who owns that number. We track it on a weekly basis, typically over a 13-week rolling period. So we have a window of trends, and we understand what's working and what's not working. And then ultimately, we end up with measurables throughout the whole organization. So a scorecard at the leadership team, we end up with scorecards in each of the respective areas, and then within the teams, and in individuals. So ultimately, everyone understands what their numbers are and what their contribution to the top level numbers are. And that's something that you can measure and manage for your people. All right, so once you have clarity of vision, you've got your people identified, you've got data that your facts and figures that you're measuring effectively, you're going to have incredible clarity on what's going on in your organization. Issues will start pouring out, but which is good. We want to know what's going on in the organization. So it's the first step is getting clarity on the vision of people and data. And as I said, we'll end up with issues. Issues are an area that everybody has, but not everybody is great at dealing with. So we talked about the issues list earlier. The longer it is, the better, in my opinion. And then we walk through a process called IDS. So we build your issues list. We work on identifying, discussing, and solving issues. Identifying is really getting to the root of the issue, understanding what the genuine issue is. Discussing is an area that most leadership teams are very good at. The problem is they'll discuss to death, but nothing gets done. There's no actionable items. You leave a meeting, if you've been in a meeting that goes on for 2 hours, you leave the meeting and nothing really happened other than just talking it to death. Next week, we have the same meeting again and still talking about the same issue, never goes away until we just get exhausted talking about it. And that's usually when it goes away, but issue's still there. So we want to make sure we're structured in our discussion and that we're structured in our solve. So when we get our issues list, the other thing that I find is that organizations are not always great at prioritizing their issues. So we talk about whatever issue either is the easiest to address, it's going to be a quick one, or they'll go in chronological order, or there's some other, the loudest person in the room is the one that gets their issue discussed. But we want to make sure we're methodical and intentional about how we walk through solving issues. So we simply, as a leadership team, we vote on the issues. What's number 1, 2, and 3? There could be 70 issues, but we only identify 3 at a time. What's number 1, 2, and 3 are we going to solve today? What needs to get solved today? Not because it's easy, but because it has to get solved today. And by the way, teams that are good at this, you'll find that you're solving 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 issues in a short period of time, in about an hour. And it's because you get structured and you get methodical about how you approach it. So we identify the first one and we talk about it, right? So whose issue was this? Let's talk about this. So this is an issue with Andy. What's the issue? And so rather than a long paragraph or pages of information, we want maybe 1 or 2 sentences, really, really simple. What is the issue? That forces you to get to the root and shave off all the unnecessary ancillary information, but give me the root. What's the issue? And it takes practice to do that, by the way. Once we have that, we start discussing it, clarifying questions. How long has this been an issue? What happens if we don't solve this? What's the impact been of this issue? Have you had conversations with Andy previously? Those kind of things. So these are not solves, these are just discussions. Once it starts getting repetitive, we're asking the same questions over, or we've run out of questions, we move on to solve. So notice we're not in the discuss, we're clarifying, we're not solving yet. And the tendency is for organizations to go from identify straight to solve. And what will happen is you end up solving the wrong problem. So we want to make sure we're clear on solving the actual issue. And so discussing it, then we have a clear point of saying, okay, we've moved to solve. What are the solutions? So in the solutions, we know who owns that issue because they brought it to us. We know from an accountability chart who has ownership of that area. So we talk about solves. So we'll all offer up our suggestions on what they should be. And then ultimately the owner will say, okay, this is the solution. And there's almost always an action item, a to-do or a decision that comes from that. So we'll record that. And now once that to-do is done, that issue should be solved forever. And we take it off the list and we move on to number 2 and then number 3 and we vote on 3 more and keep going. So that's IDS. It's simple, I know, but it takes a lot of practice. And once you get good at it, you'll be shocked at how effective your meetings become and how fast you start solving issues. The next is process. Every organization has a unique way you do things. And I'm always surprised that when I'll go in and I'll ask 10 people who have the same job how they do their job, and I'll get 100 answers. We don't want that. We want one answer on how to do that job. We want to make sure that we're doing it the best and right way every time, and that anybody who touches that process is trained on it. So there's clarity on what we do. We can share that with anyone who asks, and our clients are clear on how we work. Our vendors are clear. Our staff is clear. Everyone's clear on the process that we follow. And then ultimately we want to make sure that it's documented and then it's followed by all. So we love the systemized and predictable so you can humanize the exceptional. So we're all about systemizing what you do. So it's repeatable and scalable. And by the way, if you ever wanted to sell your company, this is another great area that is going to increase the value of your company because it's repeatable, consistent, and you can measure it. So what does it mean to be followed by all? We actually have a process we do for that. So we go through a checklist and consistently train everyone who touches that process. We measure it consistently. Are we doing, so are there controls in place? Are we measuring the process to make sure that people are doing it and it's working the way we think it should? We have leadership and management and accountability around that area, and it's getting updated. And I would add a fifth component to this, and there's ownership. Every process has a name. Somebody owns that process. Doesn't mean they do it, they own it. And they're responsible ultimately for the success or failure of that process, which means it also has to get updated when we find issues with it. So that's followed by all. And lastly, traction. So traction is EOS's term really for execution and accountability. It's what we do to ensure that all those other elements are working together. So I told you we get back to rocks. So rocks, this is an analogy that's been around forever. Stephen Covey popularized it. I'm sure others have too. But it's just the idea of this glass cylinder or vase, right? So if you've got a glass cylinder and you've got a stack of rocks, pebbles, sand, and water, and think of the sand and water as the emails and the texts and the disruptions that happen. Most of us fill our day, if the vase is the day, we fill it backwards, right? We put the water and sand in first, and then we put the pebbles in, and the rocks just don't fit. But if we start with what's the big items that have to happen, the priorities, the rocks, we put them in the vase first, then we put the pebbles in, they sift their way around the rocks, and then the sand will sift around the pebbles, and then the water will take up the rest of the volume, and everything fits in the vase. So we want to make sure that we prioritize the big things first. So we talk about rocks as a way to draw attention to the key things that need to get done this quarter. It's a 90-day objective. And lastly, consistently and effectively meeting together. So identifying our meeting pulse. So we'll meet as a leadership team on a quarterly basis. We have a 90-day world that we live in. Studies have shown that's about as long as we can hold attention as a leadership team and stay on track. So about once every 90 days, we'll get back together. We'll disconnect from the business, work on the business. In other words, looking at how we do what we do. So how have we done for the quarter? How are we doing? Where are we going now? And so we reset the next 90-day rocks and objectives, get back in the business and go run. But what we find is if you don't do this, you get off track. So the visual we often use is your team is cutting a road through a forest, and every once in a while someone's got to run up the biggest tree to make sure we're still pointing in the right direction and we're not just weaving all over the place and being ineffective in our tasks. So next is the meeting pulse, which is really a level 10 meeting is what we call that, and that's a weekly meeting of your leadership team. And I often get eye rolling at that point because I know you got loads of meetings. Last thing you want is one more meeting. But if you follow the process that we lay out here, you'll find that some of those other meetings don't have to happen. And this will be the most productive hour and a half of your week. So we meet at the same day every time, the same time every day. We start on time, end on time. So if your level 10 meetings are Mondays at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's always Mondays at 8 o'clock in the morning. The leadership team is always participating. Start on time, we end on time. It's always the same agenda. So I'll run that through real quickly with you. So we check in with each other. What's going on in the company? 5 minutes. We go through our scorecard. Our scorecard are those metrics that we measure the effectiveness of what's going on. So we have a picture of what's happening in the business. We do our rock review, those big objectives. Are you on track or off track? That's all we need to know. Customer and employee headlines. What's going on with our clients or employees that's worthy of bringing to the attention of the leadership team. And by the way, those are only reporting elements. And so it's not uncommon to have questions. Hey, why is this number that way? Or, hey, I'd love to know more about that employee headline you brought up. And when those come up, we simply add them to the issues list. So they're not consuming time in the agenda when they may not be a priority for the day. You don't know. There may be some big thing that we need to talk about that's more important than that. So we don't want to derail the conversation early on by getting into the nitty-gritty there. Let's move it all down to the bottom of the meeting. So we go through our to-do list. So from our last week's meeting, there were some things that we decided and you were going to do. Did you get them done? Done or not done? So we're creating discipline to getting things done. We remind people that 90% done isn't done, done is done. So we go through that and then on to issues. So we spend an hour solving issues together, going through the IDS process that I mentioned earlier and just chipping them off. So we keep going until we've run out of issues or we've run out of time. And if there's still issues left, no problem, leave it on the list. We'll get to it next week. What we find is that the issue list will grow and grow over time. You may find there's some issues that just you never get to. And frankly, they kind of burn themselves out. This is a way of prioritizing the top level issues that really do need your attention versus focusing on those that really don't. And we simply conclude, make sure everyone's clear on what they have to do, and then get back to the business. So that's the meeting pulse. So we're meeting consistently on a quarterly basis. We're meeting on a weekly basis as a leadership team and making sure that we're checking in, driving accountability and the direction. So that's the EOS model. So EOS is really as simple as those 6 key areas, making sure that you're effectively executing on every one of these areas. You've got clarity of vision. You've got the right people in the right seat. We're driving our business based on data. We know our issues and we're solving issues effectively. We know our process and everyone's been trained on it and we're following that. And we have traction. We have consistency in our execution and our accountability. If you do those things, your company will be not only growing, it'll be healthier, and it'll be much more valuable for sure. So the tools that we use today, we touched on the VTO. That was a 2-page business plan. We talked about the accountability chart. We talked about rocks, your meeting pulse, that level 10 meeting, your scorecard. And by the way, all these tools, if anyone is interested in them, I'm happy to share them with you. If you reach out, I've got my email that I'll include on here. I'm more than happy to send you copies of these tools. But I will say that it's not unlike anything else in that if you wanted to lose weight or get in shape, for instance, there's plenty of plans out there. That plan is usually not the issue. It's the accountability and execution. So having somebody come alongside of you, help walk through the process and hold you accountable is typically much more effective. So that's what I do. I come alongside and drive all of these areas. We do workshops with your leadership team, and then I work with you on a quarterly basis. I also work on one-on-one with the leadership team members to help them mature in the positions that they're in and bring team health across the board. So final thoughts. In order to get what you want, you need to choose and use a system. It doesn't have to be EOS. We happen to know that EOS works. There's about 10,000 companies running on it. But find one that works for you. If it's not EOS, find something. Get one, stick with one, and execute. So that's it. That's the conclusion. Andrew, I don't know if we had any questions along the way. If we do,
yeah, we did actually. We did have a question from David Acosta. David, I'm just going to let you talk because I didn't actually quite understand your question.
Okay, well, you mentioned that your business will be more attractive to an outside buyer or somebody that you want to leave it to later on if you have this system in place and it's measurable and systematic and so forth and so on, and it would be more attractive. But at the beginning of this whole thing, you said that you would figure out what makes you unique. And if what makes you unique is one of the major players or the major player, and the major player is no longer there, then how does that uniqueness pass on to the buyer? You may have a system, but you don't have the main thing that is driving that company.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I've got a lot of clients, all running EOS. Not any of them are similar in the way that they, in the products they offer, ultimately the unique value they bring. They're all different in different industries. I've got aerospace, technology, construction companies. Obviously, Gary as a CPA firm, professional services firm, loads of different industries. The execution that we're talking about, we're not changing your product, what you build and deliver. And frankly, if the product in the market you're in isn't viable, there's not much we can do. If your business is to sell and service fax machines, EOS isn't going to do a whole lot to change the market that you're in. What it does do is, if you're a growth-oriented organization, it brings the structure and consistency and execution. So the value of it to an outside buyer is being able to have an organized structure that's in place with a leadership team who knows what they're supposed to be doing. We know where we're going. We understand what we're about. We got accountability throughout it. It's not dependent on you at the top. So the systems are running and you've documented all that. That's worth a lot. It's not too different than if you go into an organization that has a chaotic accounting system, and the numbers, they can't pull together their numbers, versus you go into a company who says, okay, here it is. Here's our audited financials. We follow GAAP accounting principles and everything's in order. That's going to have more value to a buyer than one that's in chaos. And so when we talk about the operating system, it's not affecting your product. It makes what you do better, but we're not trying to make you like everybody else. What we are doing is just bringing consistency and execution. Does that help a little bit?
I'm thinking about, for instance, you have a restaurant owner who is very successful, has several restaurants, but what makes him successful is he is seen by everyone. He's there all the time.
Right.
He knows everyone, and then he dies. So you don't have that guy,
right,
to bring the people in. All you have is a structure where the personality is what sold that business, not necessarily the food, or not necessarily the ambiance or anything like that. It was the personality of the family or whatever it is. And I'm just thinking about somebody who just died recently.
Well, we would identify that as a risk for sure, because the reality is there needs to be more value to a company than just the personality. Now, if it's a lifestyle business and that's what he enjoyed doing, and you can certainly say, well, that's what he wants to do. But if your goal is growth, then a structure is going to be necessary. But I would definitely say that would be an identified risk to the business. We talk about if and how we want to overcome that as an organization. So the structure is there for excellence and execution and consistency. Again, the product that you're delivering, we want to enhance that. We don't want to take away from that by any means. But in the case that you're talking about, I would say that there probably should have been more structure to back that up. It shouldn't have been just the personality there. Al, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add, so David, really that's the number one risk in acquiring a small business. Yep. And it's really the number one devaluer. So as we looked at a company, we look at, what we do to maximize value, that's the first thing you look at. And if that owner is the business and that owner leaves, he's the engine. And when the engine's gone, you've got nothing to sell. Yeah. So that, like Jason said, is one of the first risks, which is different than culture. I mean, if you have a good culture in there, it's friendly culture, it can come from the top, but that owner, if he's driving and he's there every day, he's meeting the customers or clients are coming in, he's the face of the business, then he doesn't have a value. He hasn't maximized the value of his business. That's the very first thing, any buyer or we would look at in performing evaluation of a company is right. How key is that owner? And I think what Jason does with the EOS is it removes the owner and it truly puts in an operating system.
Right. In fact, there are private equity firms that only invest in EOS companies, specifically for that reason, is that they've seen that the probability of success on those acquisitions is much higher than someone who doesn't have a structure or some system in place for managing. So it's not a perceived risk or value increase. It's a very real, tangible impact.
Well, I can tell you, this is Gary, that I tried to read the book Traction, and I outlined it. And I tried to implement it myself, but until Jason came in and I got someone to implement it and really make it work, that's when things started happening. That's when I was able to step aside and be the visionary of the business and have people in responsible seats that take ownership. So the system is very, very effective when it's implemented appropriately.
Yeah, appreciate that. And sometimes it does take an outsider too to recognize things that maybe you haven't seen yourself. And so I know that's true of exit advisors. So when we come in and do an evaluation of risk and value a company, there's things that this team sees that may not have been seen by the owner. And same thing as we dig into EOS and putting in place a structure. It does sometimes take a third party to have a new set of eyes and perspective on it.
Yep.
Hey, Jason, we had another question from Viona. Viona, I unmuted your mic if you'd like to ask your question. Otherwise, I can do it for you. But you should be able to speak now. Well, Jason, the question was for the vision part. How can we adjust when the pandemic casts so much uncertainty?
So vision is, that's a great question. Vision is a far off objective, but we want to be specific in what we're trying to accomplish. So you heard me give some other analogies. I'll give one more. We don't want to aim for the stars and then we're happy when we hit the moon. We want to aim for the moon and hit the moon. So the vision we're going to set out there isn't this nebulous goal, but we try to get as specific as possible. But there are times when you get thrown a curveball. You know, the pandemic is a good example that could potentially delay the vision. And so I get asked this a lot. Should we adjust our targets to reflect the pandemic? And I'll tell you, I've got clients that have done both. Some have downgraded their predictions so that the targets that we're trying to hit, those, and many of them I've encouraged, let's keep it there. And what I found is if you reduce your goals, you'll hit those goals. If you leave them high to where they were, there's a good chance you're still going to hit those. It just may mean that you've got to get more creative in how you do it. And I've actually got quite a few clients that I thought were going to get just railed by the pandemic. They've made adjustments and they're actually beating last year's numbers and effectively still on track to hit their goals. So be careful about downgrading your goals. A pandemic is an opportunity for an entrepreneur to be an entrepreneur. If you started this company, you've got an entrepreneurial mind. Now's the time to use that. And we've seen great cases where that's come out, and it's been fun to see.
Well, thanks, Jason. We're a few minutes over the hour, so I guess we'll go ahead and dismiss class. But I'll let you finish up with any closing remarks. And if anyone does have extra questions, you've got Jason's information right there at the bottom on the screen. Reach out to him directly. But Jason, anything to say? Any final words?
Yeah. So just again, reach out. More than happy to help. If you're self-implementing EOS, still happy to jump on a call with you. Don't feel like you've got to use me as an implementer, to use me as a resource. Happy to help anytime. Encourage you to reach out. And if you want some tools, I'm happy to pass that on. Also, we do most everything virtually nowadays. So there's no issues or restrictions there. And we've actually seen great success through virtual meetings and sessions. And so things are continuing forward with my clients that are doing EOS, and so that's not a dilemma. Just reach out anytime.
Great adjustment, Jason.
Yeah. Yeah, and one last thing I lied. I thought I was finished. I'm going to share my screen for 5 seconds, but wanted to show, the future schedule that's coming up for the next week and all the preceding weeks. If you go to our website too. You don't have to wait for an email or for an introduction. You can see kind of the whole lineup of what we have to come. Here we had today, but we've got Al's next series around business valuation. That was always a big hit. And in 2 weeks, the CEO of Blinds.com, Jay Steinfeld, that'll be a really great event for us. So please try to register soon because spots will probably fill up. And then finally, we'll have Gary's third part of his building a professional service firm. So that's it for today. Keep an eye out for all the future events and future materials, and we look forward to having you again.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.